The letter arrived sealed in black wax, and Margaret Whitmore's stepmother smiled the way she always did before something cruel. "You're to call on the Duke of Ashford," Lady Cordelia said, sliding the paper across the breakfast table like a winning hand of cards. "Tomorrow. Alone." Eleanor, for that was the name Margaret's late father had given her, though her stepmother insisted on the colder Whitmore now, set down her teacup with careful precision. Everyone in Yorkshire knew the Duke of Ashford. Knew him the way one knew a storm cloud on the horizon, something to be respected, avoided, never approached. He had not received a caller in 3 years. Not since his wife died. Servants who left his employ spoke of him in hushed voices, a man carved from ice, quick to anger, quicker to send unwanted guests away in disgrace. "Why would he see me?" Eleanor asked. Cordelia's smile sharpened. "Oh, he won't, darling. That's rather the point. You'll be turned away at the gate like the beggar you've become, and perhaps then you'll understand your place in this house." She rose, smoothing her skirts. Lord Pembroke thought it would be amusing. "A little joke, to remind you where charity ends." Eleanor's hands trembled in her lap, though she kept her face still. She had learned, in the 2 years since her father's death, that tears only fed her stepmother's appetite. She did not know, as she folded the black-sealed letter into her pocket, that the Duke of Ashford had read her father's name that morning and gone very quiet. She did not know that somewhere in Ashford Hall, a promise made at a dying man's bedside was about to come due. She only knew she had nowhere else to go. The carriage Cordelia sent was the oldest in the stable, its wheels groaning over the frost-hardened road to Ashford Hall. Eleanor sat with her hands folded, watching Yorkshire's grey hills slide past the window, and tried not to think of what waited at the end of the journey. She had been to grand houses before, once, when her father was alive and Whitmore fortune still meant something in every drawing-room from London to Leeds. She remembered chandeliers, warm laughter, her father's hand steady on her shoulder. That life had ended the same week he did, buried alongside him while Cordelia wasted no time claiming what remained. Ashford Hall rose out of the mist like something out of a ghost story, grey stone, ivy-choked windows, a silence that seemed to swallow even the sound of the carriage wheels. Eleanor's stomach tightened as the gates loomed closer. She half expected them to be barred against her, exactly as Cordelia had promised. Instead, they opened. A footman met her at the door, his expression unreadable, and led her through a hall lined with portraits of Ashford ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to track her progress. She was shown into a small parlour and told to wait. The fire crackled. Somewhere deeper in the house, a clock ticked with patient indifference. When the door opened again, it was not the Duke who entered first, but a woman, perhaps 50, with kind eyes and flowers still dusting her sleeve, as though she'd come straight from the kitchens. "You'll be Miss Whitmore," the woman said, not unkindly. "I'm Clara Hastings, housekeeper here. His Grace will see you shortly. Sit, won't you? You look half frozen through." Eleanor sat, startled by the warmth in her voice. No one had spoken to her so gently in longer than she could remember. "Forgive me," Eleanor said carefully, "but I understood His Grace doesn't receive visitors." Something flickered across Clara's face, recognition, perhaps, or old sorrow. "He doesn't. Not since her ladyship passed." She hesitated, studying Eleanor with new interest. "But your father's name crossed his desk this morning, and I haven't seen him move that fast in 3 years. Before Eleanor could ask what that meant, heavy footsteps sounded in the corridor. Clara straightened, smoothing her apron, and slipped toward the door with a final, unreadable glance over her shoulder. "Be honest with him," she murmured. "Whatever else you do." Then the door opened fully, and Eleanor rose to face the man Yorkshire called the feared Duke of Ashford, and found herself looking instead into eyes that seemed, for one unguarded moment, almost afraid of her. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 35, with dark hair graying faintly at the temples and a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so carefully guarded. Duke Ashford stood in the doorway a moment longer than necessary, as though bracing himself, before stepping into the parlor. "Miss Whitmore." His voice was low, controlled. "I understand your stepmother sent you." "She did, Your Grace." Eleanor kept her chin level, refusing to let him see how her hands shook beneath her sleeves. "Though I confess I don't know why." Something crossed his expression, not quite a smile, not quite grief. "No," he said. "I don't suppose you do." He gestured for her to sit, and took the chair opposite rather than the one behind his desk, which struck her as strange. Dukes did not sit as equals with penniless stepdaughters. Everything about this house, this man, felt like a rule being quietly broken. "Your father was Edmund Whitmore," he said. It was not a question. He was. Her throat tightened. "You knew him?" "I did." The Duke's gaze moved to the fire, and for a moment he seemed to be somewhere else entirely, some other room, some other winter. "He did me a kindness once, when I had few friends willing to offer one. I've thought of repaying it for 2 years and never known how, since I did not know where you'd gone." Eleanor's composure cracked, just slightly. "My stepmother didn't send me here as a kindness, Your Grace. She sent me here as a joke. She expected you'd turn me away at the gate and send me home in disgrace. She hadn't meant to say it so plainly." But Clara's words echoed in her ears, "Be honest with him," and something about this quiet, watchful man made honesty feel safer than pretense. The Duke went very still. "A joke," he repeated. "Lord Pembroke's idea, I believe. He and my stepmother find it amusing to remind me of my situation." She laughed, though there was no humor in it. "I should have known better than to hope for anything else." She expected anger, or worse, pity, the two responses she'd grown accustomed to receiving from every corner of Yorkshire society. Instead, the Duke's jaw tightened in a way that had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with the names she'd just spoken. "Lord Pembroke," he said slowly, "has been attempting to purchase land bordering my northern estate for the better part of a year. Land that, if I recall correctly, once belonged to your father." Eleanor blinked. "I didn't know that." "No." He rose, moving to the window, his back to her. "I imagine there is a great deal you don't know, Miss Whitmore. But I intend to see that it doesn't remain that way." When he turned back, something in his cold reputation had cracked open, just enough for her to glimpse the man beneath it. "You will not be returning to your stepmother's house tonight," he said. "Not until I understand exactly what game is being played with your name." Eleanor stayed. Clara arranged a room in the east wing, warm and unused for years, its shelves still lined with books that smelled faintly of dust and lavender. That evening, the Duke sent word he would dine with her, an event so unusual that Clara herself brought the tray, lingering a moment longer than necessary to squeeze Eleanor's hand. "He hasn't dined with anyone since her ladyship," Clara said quietly. "Not once." "Why does he trust me?" Eleanor asked. "He barely knows me." Clara's expression softened into something sad. "Because he knew your father better than you might think, child. There are debts in this house that go back further than you know." Over dinner, the Duke was quieter than she expected, watching her with an intensity that might have unsettled her if it hadn't felt so entirely without malice. He asked about her father, his laugh, his habits, the small things only a daughter would remember, and she found herself talking more freely than she had in 2 years, the words tumbling out like water finally finding a crack in a dam. It was near the end of the meal, when Eleanor mentioned offhand that her father had once spoken of a promise made in his final days, something about a letter, a debt, words she'd never fully understood because Cordelia had swept her from the room before he could finish, that the Duke set down his glass with visible effort. "He told you about the letter," he said. Eleanor's pulse quickened. "Only that there was one. My stepmother said he was delirious. That there was nothing to it. There was everything to it." The Duke rose abruptly, crossing to a locked drawer in the sideboard, and withdrew a folded paper, its edges soft with age and handling. "Your father wrote this the week before he died. I have kept it because I did not know how to deliver it, and because I feared what it would mean for you, once it was read. He placed it in her hands. The seal was already broken, the hand unmistakably her father's. That was the moment everything changed. Eleanor unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. Her father's words rose from the page, not delirious, not confused, but clear and deliberate. He had known, in his final days, that Cordelia intended to strip Eleanor of everything, her inheritance, her home, her name. He had entrusted the Duke, an old friend from his youth, before titles and distance had separated them, with a portion of the estate set aside in Eleanor's name alone, hidden from Cordelia's reach, to be given to her the moment she came of age or came to claim it, whichever came first. Cordelia had known. She had known all along, and buried the truth rather than surrender a single acre. "She sent me here as a joke," Eleanor whispered, staring at her father's handwriting through tears she could no longer hold back, "and she sent me straight to the one man who knew the truth." The Duke's voice, when he spoke, had lost all its former ice. "Your stepmother's joke, Miss Whitmore, may prove to be the gravest mistake of her life." Outside, the Yorkshire wind pressed against the windows, and somewhere beyond the estate walls, Lord Pembroke's carriage was already turning up the drive, uninvited, and entirely unaware of what he was about to walk into. Lord Pembroke arrived unannounced, as men of his sort often did, confident that his title alone would open any door in Yorkshire. Clara met him in the entrance hall with icy politeness, informing him that his Grace was engaged and could not receive callers. "Nonsense," Pembroke said, brushing past her. "I've come about Miss Whitmore. Her stepmother is worried sick, wondering why the girl hasn't returned home." The lie came so smoothly that Eleanor, listening from the parlor doorway with the Duke beside her, felt her stomach turn. Worried sick. Cordelia had sent her here to be humiliated and cast out, worry had nothing to do with it. "Miss Whitmore is a guest in my house," the Duke said, stepping into view. His voice carried none of the warmth she'd heard at dinner. This was the man Yorkshire feared, cold and immovable. "She will remain here as long as she wishes." Pembroke's smile faltered, just slightly. "Your Grace, surely you understand the impropriety." "What I understand," the Duke cut in, "is that you and Lady Cordelia have spent 2 years concealing an inheritance that does not belong to either of you. I understand that you've been attempting to purchase land that was never legally Cordelia's to sell. And I understand that a girl who trusted her family was sent here as a cruel amusement, in the hope that I would turn her away and spare you both the inconvenience of her existence." The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor watched Pembroke's composure crack, saw the calculation behind his eyes as he searched for a way to salvage the moment. "You have no proof of any such arrangement," he said finally, his voice tighter now. "I have a letter in Edmund Whitmore's own hand," the Duke replied, "witnessed and sealed the week before his death. I have solicitors who will confirm its authenticity within the day. And I have every intention of seeing this matter brought before the proper authorities, Lord Pembroke, unless you prefer to explain to a magistrate exactly how much of the Whitmore estate you and Lady Cordelia have already sold, and to whom." Pembroke's face drained of color. It was Eleanor who spoke next, stepping forward though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Does she know I'm here? My stepmother?" "She knows," Pembroke said, recovering some of his composure, though his eyes wouldn't quite meet hers. "She assumed you'd be back within the hour, tail between your legs, as always. Then she assumed wrong." Eleanor's voice did not waver, though everything in her wanted to. 2 years of swallowed grief, swallowed anger, swallowed grief again, all of it rose now, sharp and clear. "Tell her I know about the letter. Tell her I know what she's been hiding from me since the day my father died." Pembroke left without another word, his carriage wheels tearing gravel from the drive in his haste. But Eleanor understood, watching him go, that the true battle had not ended, it had only just begun. The solicitors arrived within 2 days, exactly as the Duke had promised, and with them came confirmation of everything Eleanor's father had written. The letter was authentic. The land, nearly 400 acres bordering the Ashford estate, along with a modest fortune held in trust, belonged to Eleanor Whitmore alone, untouched by Cordelia's hand these 2 years only because the Duke himself had quietly refused every offer Pembroke made to purchase it. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the opening of a door onto a storm. Cordelia arrived at Ashford Hall 3 days later, uninvited and incandescent with fury, Pembroke trailing behind her like a man walking toward his own execution. She swept into the parlor without waiting to be announced, and for the first time in 2 years, Eleanor saw her stepmother's carefully maintained composure shatter entirely. "You ungrateful little wretch," Cordelia hissed. "After everything I've given you, a roof, food, a place in society, you had no right to expect once your father's debts were settled." "There were no debts," Eleanor said quietly. "You told me that for 2 years, and it was a lie. My father left me provided for. You knew, and you hid it, and you let me believe I had nothing left in the world but your charity. Charity I was under no obligation to give." "No," the Duke said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "You weren't obligated to give her a home. But you were obligated, under law, to disclose an inheritance that was never yours to conceal. That is not a matter of charity, Lady Cordelia. That is theft." Cordelia's eyes darted toward Pembroke, seeking some support, some way out, and found none. Pembroke had already retreated a step, his earlier confidence entirely gone, a man calculating how much distance he could put between himself and a scandal that was about to become very public. "You'll ruin us," Cordelia said, and for the first time, her voice cracked, not with grief, but with the particular terror of a woman watching her carefully built world collapse. "You ruined yourselves," Eleanor said. "The moment you decided my grief was something to profit from." For a long moment, nobody spoke. The fire cracked in the grate. Outside, rain had begun to fall against the tall windows, soft and steady, as though Yorkshire itself were holding its breath. It was Clara, standing quietly by the door, who finally broke the silence. "Lady Cordelia," she said, "the magistrate is expected within the hour. I'd suggest you use what time remains to consider what you intend to say to him." Cordelia's face went white. Whatever retort she'd been preparing died in her throat. She turned, without another word, and swept from the room with Pembroke close behind, not with dignity, but with the particular haste of people who have finally understood they have already lost. Eleanor stood very still in the silence they left behind, waiting for triumph to arrive. It didn't, not quite, not yet. What arrived instead was something quieter, the Duke's hand, resting gently over hers, and the first real warmth she had felt in 2 long years. "It's over," he said softly. "You're safe now, Eleanor." It was the first time he had used her given name. The magistrate confirmed everything within the week. Cordelia and Lord Pembroke faced formal charges of fraud and concealment, their standing in Yorkshire society dissolving as swiftly as it had once seemed unshakable. Justice, at last, had caught up with cruelty. Eleanor remained at Ashford Hall, not as a guest now, but as its mistress, for the Duke asked for her hand before the first snow fell, and she gave it without hesitation. Clara wept openly at the wedding, calling it the happiest day the house had seen in a decade. What began as a stepmother's cruel joke had led Eleanor to the one place she'd never expected to find belonging, in the arms of a man the world called cold, but who had shown her nothing except unexpected kindness. Sometimes the harshest reputations guard the warmest hearts. What would you have done in her place?